Today, with the help of local writer Leigh Giangreco, I'm discussing a longtime neighborhood bar, a pencil factory, and a noteworthy strike, and a few other aspects you might not know about Chicago's Roscoe Village. I'm Tommy Henry, and this is the Chicago History Podcast. It has been a while since I've done a one on every corner episode focused on the history of a local drinking establishment and the surrounding neighborhood. It's not easy to record audio at a bar, especially when the bar is open. The usual sounds of a bar, people talking, glassware clinking, music from a jukebox, often makes it a frustrating experience. More on that in a bit. Traveling west on Roscoe Street, that's 3400 north in the city from Lincoln Avenue, you only need to go a block or so before you're greeted with a sign painted on the railroad overpass that reads, "Welcome to Roscoe Village." These days, Roscoe Village, bounded by Addison, Belmont, Ravenswood, and the North Branch of the Chicago River, is a cozy neighborhood full of historic frame and brick single-family homes, 2 and 3 flats, and apartment buildings, all with locally owned restaurants, shops, and boutiques nearby. Of course, like much of Chicago, it wasn't always like this. In the late 1800s, German farmers settled in the area. The land closer to the Chicago River soon became a hodgepodge of brickyards, owing to the clay deposits along the banks. By the early 1900s, a new reason to travel to Belmont and Western Avenues began to take form, and in 1904, Riverview Park opened. Operating at 74 acres, Riverview became the go-to amusement park on Chicago's north side. Hundreds of thousands of yearly visitors headed to the park, and dozens of bars, taverns, restaurants, shops, and entertainment venues emerged along Belmont, Roscoe, and Western Avenues to cater to park visitors. Greenhouses and farms quickly gave way to new homes built to accommodate the growing workforce and businesses in the area, including the Wall Eversharp Pen Company, which was founded in 1913 by Charles Rood Kieran, who developed and patented the first successful mechanical pencil. Kieran started the Eversharp Company and shortly afterward partnered with the Wall Adding Machine Company of Chicago. Wall fully acquired Eversharp by the end of 1916. Construction of the Wall Adding Machine Company building at 1800 West Roscoe Street began in March of 1917. The factory started producing Eversharp pencils at this Roscoe Street address soon afterward, making it the company's principal Chicago manufacturing site. At its peak, the company employed roughly 2,500 workers who turned out millions of pens and pencils each year. On Friday, February 12, 1937, Chicago's first industrial sit-down strike was held at the Wall Eversharp Pen Company, demanding better wages. Between 125 and 150 workers, mainly young men and women, refused to leave the building until their demands were met. Women were reportedly making 27 cents an hour, and the men received 33 cents an hour. Their request was for an increase of 8 and 10 cents an hour, respectively. The workers spent the night singing, dancing, and playing poker while 75 policemen stood guard around the plant, stopping any relatives and friends of those inside from bringing supplies to the strikers. There was also concern for the possibility of theft of the company's property, which included $150,000 worth of gold, approximately $3.4 million in today's dollars, used in the manufacture of pen points. The police embargo was only so effective, though. In true Chicago fashion, as Saturday morning rolled around, workers hungry for breakfast managed to find a solution in the form of a bakery next door at 1850 West Roscoe. According to an article in the Tribune, While several of the girls on the inside attracted the attention of some of the more susceptible of the policemen on the outside, men strikers lowered a rope to the roof of the bakery, and 20 dozen sweet rolls were hauled up. By Saturday at noon, the strikers left the building after receiving a letter signed by the vice president of the company promising to discuss their demands if they left the plant. One of the bars serving the thirst needs of the Roscoe Street neighborhood, and in decades past, the pencil factory across the street, currently resides on the southeast corner of Roscoe and Wolcott, 4 Moon Tavern. If a movie production company came to the city and needed to film at a corner bar with a Chicago feel, they couldn't do much better than 4 Moon. As you enter the front door, to your left you'll see a good-sized bar with 15-plus stools, and to your right, tall tables against the wall. Just past the bar is a pool table next to a CD jukebox on the wall. Above the CD jukebox are a few vinyl albums on display, including Stanley Pulaski and his orchestra performing Beer and Pretzels Polka. Just past the pool table is a narrow doorway that leads to a back room with a few low tables, a couch and matching chairs, and a mirror surrounded by a framed plexiglass-encased beer can collection. Actually, 2 framed plexiglass-encased beer can collections. And because Chicago bars, the entire bar is decorated with breweriana, that's collectibles and memorabilia related to brewing and beer. I was fortunate enough to get a few minutes with the owners of 4 Moon Tavern.
Hi, I'm Matt Kozlowski.
Hi, I'm Robbie Leigh.
Matt Kozlowski grew up in Macomb, Illinois, roughly 250 miles southwest of 4 Moon, and attended the University of Illinois in Champaign. So, what brought Matt to Chicago?
I was an acting major at University of Illinois and came up here for the theater scene to work in the theater.
This was in the 1990s when Chicago's theater scene, especially independent theater, was at its most vibrant. So, how did a theater major end up running a bar?
Well, it was myself and 3 other guys, so 4 Moon. 2 others were actors and another guy was a producer. As actors, we realized we were going to have to always have a second job. We weren't going to be able to make a living being an actor. You can, but we're just being realistic. And we were like, if we're going to have a second job, we'd rather be in charge if we could, if it was possible. And fortunately, our friend, the producer, Tom Clark, put the money up to make it happen. So, we would just run it. And that was the plan. That was the whole deal. At the beginning, it was a big actors bar and theater bar, and over time it's changed.
Chicago has many stories of bar owners retiring and selling their establishment to one of their patrons. This was not the case with 4 Moon. So what made Matt and his friends settle on this spot?
Well, we were looking for a corner neighborhood tavern, which was exactly what this is. So, and something that was like in a neighborhood, not like on a real busy street, just like, but a Chicago neighborhood corner bar.
One on every corner.
There were a couple that we almost got that were not as good as this one, as far as just the look of it and the feel of it. I was up on a fishing trip up in Wisconsin, and those guys called me and said, I think we found a place, you got to come down and check it out. I canceled the trip. It was just a solo trip on my own, so I didn't really have much of I had nothing planned. And I was like, okay, and I came back down, and it took me like 10 hours to make a 4-hour trip because my Corolla radiator went out. But I got here, and we ended up checking out. Since I walked in, I was like, oh, hell yes.
Before Matt and his friends bought the bar, it was a bar-restaurant called Cocopelli, named for the humpbacked, flute-playing fertility deity and trickster figure in the mythology of some Native American cultures, particularly those in the southwestern United States. Now, to me, 4 actor friends who enjoyed spending time at bars without too much combined experience running a bar sounded like a recipe for disaster. But they found a solution. Robbie Leigh.
I grew up in Park Ridge and moved to the city when I was 19. I was going to school in the city and worked in a ton of places. And I was actually catering for our partner Steve's wife's company, an Irish theater company called Shawnee, a friend of mine was in it, and I started catering for them, doing benefits and getting my feet wet. I was thinking of going to cooking. I did start going to cooking school and was going to open a catering company and worked for a bunch of caterers. And then this kind of fell in my lap, and I was like, I love this place.
Steve Herson, who was one of the other partners, he'd worked in the bar industry for a long time, and we'd all kind of, been around bars because we're actors, and got to go somewhere after the show. When we found this place, and it took about a year and a half of looking at places, it had the kitchen, and we realized that none of us knew really what to do as far as, Steve might know a little bit, but the rest of us were just clueless. And so Steve knew Robbie from a catering company, and we hired her to be a kitchen consultant. The deal was like, we'll hire her for like a month, and she'll get everything going, and then that'll be that. And within about a week, we were like, you want to be a partner? Maybe less. And she foolishly said yes. And over time, the other guys have left for one reason or another, and it's just been the two of us now for 13, 14, 15 years.
I was curious as to what Robbie, having the bulk of the experience, thought of the place when she first arrived.
The Cocopelli walls, though, were like when I walked in, I was like, what the f- is this place? Because it was white walls, and then there were like cobalt blue and cyan blue mountainscapes with rust dripping and Cocopellis. He had a big,
Just confusing.
a big giant espresso machine behind the bar that took up like that whole cooler there was like espresso section, and it was weird. But I think that was one of the things I fell in love with. The guy that painted and did some of the artwork too. He did the skulls. Just the style of the place coming together. It was like, oh, this is awesome, and we really
changed.
warmed
There's
it
just-
up
there's
because
just
it kind of
more-
felt cold to me the first time I came in, and now it's like it's really cozy in here. And
Before Matt and his friends took it over, it had only been Cocopelli for 2 years. Before then, it was Oscar's place, back when the neighborhood was a little rougher, fighty, as Robbie called it. According to Matt, Oscar had a large fish tank behind the bar. It was at one time owned by a man named Rudy, according to Sparky, a charismatic bartender at Four Moon, who first moved to Roscoe Village in the late 80s and has all the great stories about the seedier days of the surroundings. Going back to the 1920s, I found a classified listing for this address in the Chicago Tribune offering cigar store and 3-flat building opposite very large factory. That factory, of course, was the pencil factory. In February of 1934, in the Tribune's store and bar fixtures classified section was a listing for a brand new electric beer pump for sale. At some point, this address was a place called Jake's Tavern, which was purchased by a woman named Leona Costa in 1961. Within 2 years, it was listed for sale again. With Robbie on board, Four Moon began to get noticed for their food menu. In December of 2000, the Chicago Tribune ran a glowing review titled Moons Over Roscoe. Menu at Spruced Up Tavern rises above typical bar food, giving Four Moon 3 forks out of 4. A 2005 article in the Red Eye daily newspaper praised Four Moon for its appeal to those looking for a Wisconsin-esque bar. Certainly the amount of dark wood and neon signs helped that impression. Looking over the list of bars in the article as I researched this episode, I was struck by just how many have changed names or ceased to be a bar altogether. But not Four Moon. Over the years, there have been a few people who've come through the door to share their stories of the building. Here's Robbie.
I met a woman here. I came into work and she was sitting at the bar, and one of the bartenders said, hey, this lady is here. She said her grandmother used to own this bar. This was 15 years ago, maybe. And I was like, of course I want to talk to her. So we talked for a while and showed her around. And she said, as a little girl, she was probably 10 years older than I am. She said the back room was where her grandma and grandfather lived, and her uncle lived with them just in that room. And grandma would cook in the kitchen for the factory workers across the street. And she was very emotional, just like coming in and seeing the place, and it was it was amazing.
Speaking of the back room, for a time it served as a diner that was either called Mary's Cafe or Jean and Mary's. Matt and Robbie couldn't agree on which. In 2014, writer Josh Noel, who I interviewed not long ago about his book on the history of Chicago-based Spirit Malort, asked then Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel to name some of his favorite bars as part of his Chicago beer tourism campaign. One of the ones that made the cut? Four Moon. Of course, everything changed on Monday, March 16th, 2020 at 9 p.m., that day when a statewide order went into effect, which closed all bars and restaurants to the public to help minimize the spread of COVID-19.
That was rough, and you know, at one point it was, I think Matt said, like, well, if it's just going to be the two of us, we're not closing. And that's kind of how we felt about it, and we were not going to roll over, and I don't know, we both love this place, and the government helped a lot. You know, we got a lot of money to keep going and applied for everything we could get and got some of it.
Robbie and Matt shared with me that during the shutdown, the neighborhood really stepped up, ordering food for takeout, which kept them going during those dark months. Four Moon also has patio seating, which helped as restrictions were loosened. I asked both Robbie and Matt a question about which I'm often curious. What are the best and worst things about owning a corner bar in Chicago?
The best part is the people, and they're just awesome people who come back, you know, move away and come back and like, do you remember me? And I'm like, of course I remember you. And just lovely people who really appreciate this place, and that makes me feel so good.
Yeah, we were just closed for 4th of July for a private party for some old regulars that were getting married. And so, like, what do you say, like 20 years ago, they were like, there's like maybe 15 of them that were like thick as thieves in here all the time. You know, a bunch of teachers and, you know, taught in the area, and just like, but all up, and it was like, and they were just a great group of regulars. And to see them like 20 years later, you know, all together, you know, with their new families and whatever else, hanging out here, having a great time, and just felt like that everyone just, they walked in like nothing had changed, you know, just like boom, just like,
and he was
the same.
The groom, Kevin, he said, I came here the day after you opened. That was my first time here, and he just loved it. And
that's the great thing is, you know, regulars that you haven't seen a guy in 10 years, and he walks in and it's just like, you want a PBR? Yeah, I do. Yeah, I know, it's the same.
Worst, unsurprisingly, was the amount of cleaning that goes into keeping a bar in proper order. There have been changes to the bars over the years. I was shown a picture of a gorgeous, old-timey pressed tin ceiling that, bartender Sparky told me, still exists, but it was covered over long ago by a former owner. In its place is a wood drop ceiling that matches the rest of the wood decor. Matt told me the entire floor has been replaced over the years. So, were there other changes that needed to be made as the building at 1847 West Roscoe went from Kokopelli to Four Moon?
the Kokopelli walls, though, were like when I walked in, I was like, what the f is this place? Because it was white walls, and then there were like cobalt blue and cyan blue mountainscapes with rust dripping and Kokopellis. He had a big,
just confusing.
A big giant espresso machine behind the bar that took up like that whole cooler there was like espresso section, and it was weird. But I think that was one of the things I fell in love with. The guy that painted and did some of the artwork too. He did the skulls. Just the style of the place coming together. It was like, oh, this is awesome, and we really warmed it up because it kind of felt cold to me the first time I came in, and now it's like it's really cozy in here. And
I wanted to know many years down the line when Matt and Robbie decided to step away from the bar business, what they would like their patrons to think about Four Moon.
Huh.
It didn't suck.
Yeah, it was okay. It was, one thing that I want people to feel, I want everyone to feel welcome and like that they belong here. Until they're a jerk, and then it's like, off you go.
Yeah, then they're out of here.
Yeah,
Nice.
you get shut down if you're going to treat people badly or be a jerk. And
A few things of note before we move on to the next segment. After efforts to get into the ballpoint pen business proved costly, the Wall Eversharp Pen Company was sold in 1957 to Parker Pen, which shuttered the building at 1800 West Roscoe, laying off approximately 1,800 local workers. Parker Pen moved the remaining operation to a smaller location in suburban Arlington Heights, and in 1960 the property on Roscoe was sold to a developer who divided the building into numerous units for commercial use. When Riverview Park closed in 1967 without warning, the area suffered. Nearly 1,000 seasonal workers and 80 full-time employees lost their positions when the park closed permanently. The park's closing also affected local businesses, including restaurants, shops, and transportation services in the surrounding North Side neighborhoods that depended on park workers and visitors. According to the Roscoe Village Neighbors website, the Kennedy Expressway, built just a few years earlier, and the GI Home Loan Program made it possible for younger people to move to the suburbs where they believed schools were better than those in the city. Area real estate values plummeted, and by 1970, a frame or brick two-flat sold for $20,000, or less, roughly $165,000 in today's value. Fortunately, starting in the 1980s, artists, young professionals, and small business owners began discovering Roscoe Village's solid stock of two-flats and graystones, affordable compared to nearby Lakeview or Lincoln Park. They purchased and rehabbed period homes, setting off a modest real estate boom along Roscoe and Addison streets. A flurry of new independent cafes, boutiques, and taverns opened to serve the incoming residents. Vintage storefronts were repainted, and decorative street banners were installed, giving the commercial districts a fresh, village-like character. The old Wall Eversharp building was purchased by developers in 1987, who then gutted it and turned it into the 139-unit Pencil Factory Lofts. Now, at the beginning of the episode, I mentioned the sign painted on the railroad overpass that reads, "Welcome to Roscoe Village." If you look at the other side, it reads, "The Village Within the City." Someone who I believe agrees with that statement is my next guest.
Hi, I'm Leigh Giangreco. I'm a freelance reporter in Chicago. I moved here in 2020, and I live in Roscoe Village.
Leigh Giangreco is a Chicago-based writer whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, Politico, The Guardian, Bloomberg City Lab, Chicago Reader, Chicago Sun-Times, Crain's Chicago Business, Block Club Chicago, and countless other publications. It was actually Leigh's idea to feature Four Moon for this episode of One at Every Corner, but due to a scheduling snafu, she wasn't able to join me for the Matt and Robbie portion of the day. Fortunately, Leigh arrived just in time to enjoy a beer and a meal on the patio at Four Moon. Right off the bat, I wanted to know what it was about Four Moon that first grabbed Leigh's attention.
What I like about it is it's got an old school Chicago bar feel. Like, even just looking inside, you know, I can see like all of the neon signs, all of the, you know, classic beer signs, and the kind of the stained glass lamps and everything. But then it's clean, which is funny because my friend and I always joke about, like, we want a dive bar with a clean bathroom. And when she said that, I was like, that's not a thing. That's an oxymoron. But it exists in Chicago, but you have to find them. And I would say this is one of them. So it's a clean dive.
What made you decide to settle in Roscoe Village?
Well, when I originally moved to Chicago in July of 2020, so I actually just had my 5-year Chicagoversary recently. I was in North Center, which is not that far, and then I moved 2 times within North Center, actually within the same block in North Center, and then the 3rd time that I moved, I found a place in Roscoe. So it wasn't like I was like targeting Roscoe Village. There were just things I wanted to be near the Brown Line. I like being near the lake, but not right on top of the lake. I'm not cool enough to live in Logan, and it's too far from the lake for me. So basically my requirements were affordable rent, close-ish to the lake, and I know that Roscoe is not really the place for like a 34-year-old without kids. It's not where all the young people are. It's not Ukrainian Village or, again, Logan Square or any of those cool neighborhoods. But I lived in one of those cool neighborhoods in DC, and when I left DC in the middle of 2020, everything that made that neighborhood, Columbia Heights, cool at that time was really anxiety-inducing. So being in a crush of people, being right on top of everybody, that was all really cool before there was a global pandemic. But then that summer, I wanted a neighborhood that was quieter, that had more green space, and so kind of North Center offered that. And then I was already, I guess, in that mode of just living around dogs and babies everywhere. So now I'm just in that area and have aged 50 years. But in a good way, because I'm like an 80-year-old man on the inside. So it fits my vibe.
You moved to Chicago during the pandemic. What brought you to Chicago?
I came here for a job at News Nation, which was and still is somehow, despite their ratings, a national cable news station based in Chicago. And, it was the beginning of the pandemic. It was like any port in a storm, find a job, ended up there. It was an experience. What I will say is the day that I gave my 2 weeks, a piece of the set fell on somebody like Looney Tunes style. And that, I feel like that sums up what working at News Nation was like. So I didn't sign up for that job because I wanted to be in cable news, but I have lots of family in Chicago, and I love my time in DC, but I don't know if this was like this for you, maybe not because you're more established, but once COVID hit, it felt like everybody was kind of fleeing either home or going abroad or moving to a new city. So it kind of shook up a lot of my core friend group in DC, and it just felt like a time for a change. And Chicago felt like enough of a change from DC, but also very familiar because I have family here, and also because Chicago is basically Buffalo, where I'm from, but with jobs. So, there's a lake. It has very similar demographics, very Catholic. A lot of the architecture is similar. We have a lot of Art Deco architecture, but, Chicago is not the second poorest city in America. So that's a big difference.
So, Buffalo, Washington, D.C., Chicago. Mm-hmm. Chicago's your favorite?
Yeah, I think so. I think D.C. was good for the time in my life that I was there. I went to undergrad there, went to American. So I was basically in D.C. or around there. My first job out of college, I was a reporter in Bethany Beach, which is down the beach from Rehoboth Beach and Dewey Beach. It's like the area that Biden had his beach house. So Delaware is not, Dewey Beach is like a party town, but like it's a mile strip of partying. So it's not the most exciting place, but it's 3 hours from DC, so I was still kind of there. But yeah, like most of my 20s were spent in DC. I lived in a group house of 6 people. It was cool to be there during the Obama administration. That was a really optimistic time. I joke with my friends that being in DC at that time was like living through the early 1960s. It was this golden age where we thought like everything is getting more progressive, and oh my God, we got gay marriage in 2015. That was the night that I moved back to DC for my first adult job there. It was my second job out of college. And and my first job in DC since I graduated college, and literally rolled in and then walked down the street to the White House, and it was all lit up in rainbow. So, there was stuff like that going on, and that was really great. But the downside of DC is, I always joke with people, it's like Logan's Run. It's really expensive there, so you get priced out if you get older. Friends who have kids had to move to the suburbs, which people do in Chicago too, but I think to a lesser extent. And just in general, the cost of living there is crazy. Like, you have people living in group houses of 6 people into their 40s. Some of them like living with 5 other people, but some of them are also like working at USAID and still not making enough to live, So it's just, Chicago's a little more livable. Like, I can see myself living here if I wanted for the rest of my life and having a pretty good quality of living, versus DC, I'd either have to move to the far-flung suburbs or sell out and become like a defense lobbyist, in order to just get by.
Or sell a kidney.
Start
selling kidney.
I don't have enough kidneys to live in DC full time. I'd have to have multiple.
Everybody has
kidneys.
6, right?
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm not good
extras,
with biology.
Yeah.
This is the part where, half a beer in, we went off on 100 tangents, ranging from Logan's Run to the TV show ER to how English cab drivers have to memorize all the streets, the old city cemetery and all the bodies that were never moved, and Leigh's time working as a server in a fine dining restaurant where she was to be engaging without being seen or something like that. I should point out, we are drinking the off-color Ghost Lemons, Funky Wit featuring a blush of summer peach, preserved lemon, and marmalade with kiwi and hay. Hay?
Okay, so
Barnyard funk dissipates with a twinge of tartness to a slight saline finish reminiscent of brackish water. Brackish water.
it tastes better than
It tastes better than the description.
But it's more peachy than lemony. Yeah.
One of the questions Leigh had for me was whether anything bad ever happened at the building that now houses Four Moon, and honestly, I didn't find anything about it ever being robbed or a news item about an argument that turned violent. And trust me, I've read stories similar to those at plenty of Chicago bars. After talking for a little longer about a variety of topics, I think Leigh and I both agreed on a few things. One, that Roscoe Village is a fine place to live at any age, but it helps if you're not looking for a wild nightlife scene. And two, Four Moon is the kinda corner bar that everyone needs to enjoy often. Thanks for listening to today's episode about Four Moon Tavern, Roscoe Village, and the Pencil Factory strike. Special thanks to my guests, writer Leigh Giangreco and Four Moon Tavern's Matt Kozlowski and Robbie Lane for their time and insights. If you have any questions, anything to add, or just want to say hi, feel free to send me an email at chicagohistorypod@gmail.com. The art for most Chicago History Podcast episodes, including this one, comes from my longtime friend, John K. Schneider. Top-notch Johnny. If you need creative work done, John K. is your best choice. Reach out to him at angeleyesartjks@gmail.com. I will be back soon with more stories from Chicago's history. Until then, get out and explore when possible. Learn more about whatever city you live in, and stay safe.